Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 20614 in the name of Bill Kidd on justice for WASPI women. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Bill Kidd to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I want to begin by paying tribute to all the women who have campaigned tirelessly to right this terrible wrong. If it had not been for their tenacity, their determination and their deep sense of injustice, we would never have got this far. So to every WASPI woman, thank you very much. The motion before us today couldn't be clearer. Today we condemn the UK Government's continued refusal to compensate the more than 3.5 million women across the UK affected by the acknowledged failures of the Department for Work and Pensions to properly inform them of increases to their state pension age. And we condemn the fact that this indefensible refusal blatantly ignores the advice of the Government's own advisers, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, who recommended compensation of between £1,000 and £2,950 for every woman so badly let down. We champion the voice of the WASPI women in the campaign that this latest decision demonstrates utter contempt for the women affected, and today we demand the immediate reversal of what can only be described as a shameful, immoral and inhumane decision by the UK Government. To understand the anger, we must remember the history. The UK Government's 1995 State Pension Act increased the state pension age for women from 60 to 65, in itself a significant change. But the real injustice lies in how it was handled. Women were not properly or personally notified. Many had planned their retirement around receiving their pension at 60, resulting in untold financial hardship. In 2011, further increases to the state pension age were brought in faster than the then UK Government had promised, meaning women of a similar age had to wait disproportionately longer for their pension. For example, a one-year difference in birthday could result in a 3-year difference to the state pension age. In 2021 and in 2024, the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman concluded that the Department for Work and Pensions had repeatedly failed to act and was guilty of maladministration. And yet, despite that clear ruling, despite the recommendation for compensation, despite the UK Government being forced to review its earlier refusal, the decision in January was to award nothing. Nothing. Across the UK, 3.6 million women have been affected. In Scotland, it's almost 336,000 women. Many have faced severe financial hardship. Many have depleted their savings, taken on debt, worked longer in ill health, or been forced into poverty. 23% of single female pensioners in Scotland live in relative poverty, with 2/3 of pension credit claimants being women. The gender pension gap stands at nearly 40%, growing to a £100,000 difference by retirement age. By their late 50s, women's pensions wealth is just 62% of men's. These aren't just statistics, these are real figures, these are real lives. These are injustices. The other week, I had the privilege to meet many of those campaigning for justice here at the Scottish Parliament. My local WASPI group, the WASPI Women of 2018, have been one of the groups who have been tireless in their calls for justice and are one of the most active groups in the UK. And I want to take a moment to put on record my heartfelt thanks and respect to their extraordinary organiser, Marion McMillan, and her good friend from the south side of Glasgow, Christine McMillan, in no relation to each other, for their relentless work. As I stood outside Parliament with them there in their purple pinstripe blouses and proudly perched boaters, they did, of course, remind me of the suffragettes, of the courage, dignity and quiet strength of those who came before them. They remind us all of the many struggles women have endured and the victories they have hard won. And they reminded us that discrimination against women did not end in 1918, nor in 1928, and it certainly did not end in 1995, It hasn't ended today. When I spoke to them, many of them told me this decision was the final straw. They said they would not trust the UK Government again. Some said they would not trust Labour again. Frustration has turned to anger, and anger has turned to something deeper, to a loss of trust. Presiding Officer, governments must be trusted to make the right decisions, trusted to listen, trusted to act when wrongdoing is identified. On this issue, the UK Government has failed that test, and we need a government we can trust to make the right decisions for the people, a government that listens to the people. And if Scotland had the powers that independence will bring, we can make those decisions and right these wrongs. We'd not be waiting in Westminster to show compassion. We'd not be watching Ombudsman's recommendations gather dust. We should have the tools to act, and to act justly. The women I met in their purple pinstripes deserve better. They deserve a government they can trust, a government that honours its obligations, a government that does not treat them with contempt. Justice for WASPI women is not a footnote. It is a test of fairness. It is a test of integrity. And I believe it's a test of where power should lie. Presiding Officer, let us stand with these women. Let us condemn the shameful decision and work to see it changed. And let us continue to argue for a Scotland with the power to right such wrongs, a Scotland where justice is not delayed, denied or dismissed, but delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Tim Eagles, to be followed by Jamie Hepburn. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I should say from the outset that I've never spoken in a WASPI debate before or had any involvement, but I have seen and I have listened and I have heard the voice of many campaigners over the years, particularly when I was in Murray Council back in 2017 to 21. I have been trying to read some of the history to this debate, and I won't go over old ground on the issue, as many of the facts and details are well established through numerous debates, legal disputes and reviews. If I understand it correctly, the decision to begin the process of equalising the state pension age for men and women dates back to 1995, and I think Bill Kidd just alluded to that. That's over 30 years ago, and this decision has been supported by every UK government since, and I also believe originally supported by the SNP. The motion calls for the UK Government to pay out a compensation package, but that would likely come with an estimated cost, as I understand it, of around £10.3 billion. Back in 2022, when Sir Keir Starmer was Leader of the Opposition, he called for fair and fast compensation for WASPI women. But now that he is Prime Minister, that is no longer the case. Arguably, Labour could have been upfront about that choice in 2024, but instead it was dragged out for more than a year before confirming that they had no intention of paying compensation. I'm not prepared to stand here and insult WASPI women, of whom, through all I have read, I have the greatest of respect, understanding and sympathy, by saying that my party would have taken a different position. We also did not introduce compensation during our time in government. But just to touch on the Scottish Parliament, though, and something that Bill Kidd said at the end, and I think you were seeking independence in order to pay compensation. My understanding is that we know through sections 24, 26 and 28 of the Scotland Act 2016 that gives the Scottish Parliament a variety of powers that SNP ministers could have used to support the WASPI women if it had chosen to do so. And I understand the former Work and Pensions Minister, Guy Opperman, told the SNP in 2018 that the UK Government would not object to that in any way if the SNP took its own decisions in the Scottish Parliament to compensate. So I don't think hiding behind a reserved rule is fair in this Parliament. The decision to equalise and increase the state pension age for men and women was clearly not an easy decision to make, but it was a necessary one for the future of the state pension. The Scottish Conservatives will continue to stand up for pensioners, ensuring that the important protections as the triple lock remain in place, and continuing to call out the Labour Government on its decision to remove the winter fuel payment. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I now call Jamie Hepburn, to be followed by Mercedes Vialba. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I say to Tim Eagle, that might be the first time he spoke in a WASPI debate. For his own sake, I would suggest it might want to be the last time he speaks in a WASPI debate. Can I begin by thanking my friend Bill Kidd for lodging the motion that we debate this evening. Also thank the WASPI campaign and Age Scotland for their briefings in advance of this debate. I want to speak this evening in a spirit of solidarity with WASPI campaigners and to address the injustice they face. The more than 336,000 women in Scotland affected by the failures of the Department for Work and Pension. Indeed, the more than 3.5 million women across the UK, and they deserve more than warm words and procedural delay. They deserve fairness, they deserve dignity, and they deserve compensation for the hardship they have endured. And we should remind ourselves that the concerns about injustice are borne out by the clear, careful and unequivocal findings of the Parliamentary Ombudsman. Maladministration occurred. Women were not properly informed of changes to their state pension age. The WASPI campaign briefing reminds us that the Ombudsman found that DWP officials were aware that numerous women who were affected by the changes were unaware that they were coming, and compensation, modest compensation I might add, was recommended as well. Yet the UK Government has chosen to ignore those recommendations made independently of any form of political or external interference, and in doing so they ignore the lived reality of countless numbers of women who have faced financial insecurity, anxiety and in too many cases real hardship. And let us remind ourselves, President, that too many of those women affected are no longer with us and will have no prospect of justice at all. WASPI campaigners have fought tirelessly for years, many of them from my own constituency, and many have been in touch with me. And I just want to offer a small sample of what some of them have told me. One constituent who was born in 1956 told that despite having lived at the same address for over 24 years, she had no notification of changes. She told me of feeling aggrieved and that having paid into the system since she was 18 years of age, with only a few years childcare break, her pension entitlement was removed. Another constituent born in 1957 told me she'd been working and paying into the system since she was 16. She's self-employed and cares for her brother, who has severe epilepsy. She received only 2 years' notice of this change and rightly feels that was not sufficient notice to make up for the loss of 6 years' pension entitlement. Another constituent born in 1953, a widow, spoke of the difficulties she has faced despite already having downsized but facing challenges with paying utility bills and cost of living challenges. Those are real lived experiences of women who are from my constituency, and their anger today is justified. They were led to believe that justice might be finally forthcoming, only to see hope withdrawn at the last moment. As Age Scotland has made clear, the gender pension gap, standing at 39%, already leaves women approaching retirement with significantly less security than men. To compound that inequality with administrative failure and then refuse to any form of redress, despite it being recommended, is quite simply indefensible. Before the last general election, we saw countless numbers of senior figures in the Labour Party rushing to stand beside WASPI women. Tweets sent, photographs taken, promises implied. But yet once power beckoned, those same voices fell silent. WASPI women were abandoned. I believe it's time for Anasawa to account for his actions in endorsing and championing a Labour government, despite his newfound protestations about the Prime Minister. He and all those other senior Labour parliamentarians who promised to stand by WASPI women should apologise for abandoning them now. Presiding Officer, the injustice WASPI women have faced must be recognised, and it must be an injustice remedied. That hardship and knowledge must be hardship addressed, and the women who worked, contributed and played by the rules should not be forgotten, and they should be compensated as the Parliamentary Ombudsman has said they must.
Thank you. I call Mercedes Villalba to be followed by George Adam. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to contribute remotely to tonight's debate, and I congratulate Bill Kidd for securing chamber time for this important issue. I'm privileged to represent the North East region, which is home to Linda Carmichael, the WASPI Scotland Chair, and I'm grateful to Linda and the other WASPI delegates who travelled to Parliament earlier this month to speak to MSPs about their campaign for pension equality. I'd like to put on record my support and solidarity with the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign, and to thank them and organisations like Age Scotland for their briefings ahead of tonight's debate. These are women who'd always expected to retire at 60 and made plans on that basis. Women who, I should add, made these plans against the backdrop of austerity that made it harder for young mothers to access childcare and return to the workplace. As we've heard from the dedicated WASPI campaigners, the changes and maladministration meant that in some cases they could no longer care for their grandchildren or other family members. So it is incredibly disappointing that following a fresh review, the UK government has announced that there will be no financial compensation for WASPI women. I disagree with this decision. I don't think it's right, and I will continue to call on the government to think again. Because campaigners and women affected are justifiably angry about this decision. The change to state pension age has impacted around 336,000 women in Scotland, and the current position taken by the UK government is undoubtedly unfair, and we will not accept it. But like others, I don't believe it's enough to criticise successive UK governments when this Scottish government could act to provide compensation to the WASPI women if it so wished. It has used these powers before, it can choose to do so again, but it does not want to act. Because rather than utilising devolution to its fullest extent, the SNP have used the injustice faced by the WASPI women, like so many issues, as a political football, preferring to exploit distress and indignation than to use its powers in government to resolve it. And that's not a politics that I can support. That's why I added my support to the motion laid in this Parliament by Katie Clark, MSP, a long-time advocate of the WASPI campaign. It's why I've publicly and on the record called out the mistakes of the UK government, and it's why I did not hesitate to support this motion from Bill Kidd. And it's why I will not stop speaking out in support of the WASPI women until they win, until we win. Because an injustice to them is an injustice to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call George Adam to be followed by Marie McNair. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to my friend and colleague Bill Kidd for bringing this debate to the Chamber and the WASPI women who continue to campaign, because behind all the acronyms and parliamentary process sits a simple truth, Presiding Officer. This is real people who were let down, real women who were let down, women in our communities who were let down by the UK government. And I spoke during Kenny Gibson's members' debate previously, and I was going to apologise if I was going to be repeating myself, but I think after listening to some of the opposition contributions today, I think I have to do it, because it's a case of when Tim Eagle talks about we should the Scottish Government should do it, you know, take some responsibility. The UK Government needs to take some responsibility for what they have done to the WASPI women. You know, this is just absolute nonsense for them to come here and make this academic argument at this stage. They're asking, the WASPI women are not asking for special treatment. They're not even arguing the law should never have changed. They're asking for something far more basic than that. They're asking for fairness and for redress, because the Parliamentary Health Service and Ombudsman found maladministration in the way the Department of Work and Pensions failed to properly communicate the changes to the women's state pension age. The Ombudsman looked at the evidence and concluded that many of the women born in the 1950s were left with little time to plan for the future. Because this is not some abstract policy debate. This is about a woman in Paisley who gave decades of work in her communities, who made plans around the retirement age, to be told and then discovered far too late that the goalposts had moved. I've said this before, these are our mums, well, not in my case because they're only maybe 10 years older than me, some of them, but I've said they're the mums, they're the grandmothers and members of our families. These are real people living in our communities and real lives we're dealing with here. It's about a worker who did everything right, who paid in, who believed the system would keep faith with them, who then had to choose between heating and eating while waiting for a pension that would never end up coming there. In December 2024, the DWP apologised and accepted the maladministration, but it refused to set up the compensation scheme. And then, when the WASPI women took legal action, the Labour UK government settled, committed to reconsider the decision properly, and even paid more than half of the WASPI legal costs. But in January this year, the Labour UK government refused again. They came out with the same flawed arguments, the same cold comfort, the same old messages as they said to thousands of women before. We know the system failed, they said, but you're on your own. So what we have here is a U-turn on a U-turn on the back of a U-turn back to their original position. The WASPI women were told to wait for the review. They were told the case would be considered afresh, but instead we got a rerun. And for women affected, that's not just disappointing, that's crushing, because every delay is not a line in a ministerial statement. It's another month of anxiety, another month of lost income, and another month of feeling invisible. Presiding Officer, My position in this is clear. I stand with the WASPI women because justice delayed is justice denied. So today I say to the UK Government and those in the opposition in here, stop making excuses, stop hiding behind selective arguments, stop using recycled arguments, do the right thing. Accept the injustice has been identified, provide fair compensation and restore a measure of dignity to women who have already been asked to pay far too high a price for the UK Government's failure. The UK Labour Government and their MPs, many of whom were elected in the back of supporting WASPI women, need to take responsibility and do the right thing.
Thank you. And I call Marie McNair to be followed by Maggie Chapman. Up to 4 minutes. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to my colleague Bill Kidd for bringing this important debate to the Chamber. The Labour UK Government's decision not to compensate the WASPI women is as appalling as it is hypocritical. Labour politicians who, prior to being in government, stood beside these women for every photo op and called for compensation, only to desert them once in power. And with an election on the horizon, some are arguing they're still on the side of WASPI women. But the WASPI women are not daft and won't be fooled this time. They know warm words won't pay the bills. And this decision denies as many as 3.6 million women the rightful compensation that they deserve. In my constituency, that is 4,700 women in Eastern Bartonshire and over 6,000 in Western Bartonshire that have been affected by changes to the state pension age. Without a doubt, behind these figures are real women with deep and complex lives, women who have worked tirelessly, who during their working life have been paid less than men, did not have maternity rights and may have had smaller private pensions, and who often took on most of the caring responsibilities for the family. Due to government failings, these women found themselves facing financial uncertainty at a time when they should be able to enjoy the next stage of their life. Since 2015, 405,770 WASPI women have died. Presiding Officer, this figure should haunt those on the Labour and Tory benches. Nearly 500,000 women dead without even getting the rightful compensation they deserve. This is truly shameful and a real injustice. And without a doubt, Presiding Officer, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman were clear that these women should be compensated. But despite this, the Labour Government have ignored this decision. This is an historic injustice. And the DWP's own research showed that they failed to get the message across and choose to do absolutely nothing about it. The Labour Government have said that compensation would not be a fair use of money. Well, the WASPI women said it best, stating recently that if your MP said paying compensation wouldn't be fair or proportionate, neither was it fair not to give adequate warning to the women affected. Presiding Officer, in the name of equality, this process has once again left women facing inequality. I, alongside my SNP colleagues, have stood beside these women for years, and I was pleased to see them in Parliament the other week, including one of my own constituents, to reiterate my own support. And these women were promised in good faith that a Labour UK Government would right this wrong. But of course, we have instead seen U-turn after U-turn from the Labour Government. Make no mistakes, the Labour Party, Tories and Reform are no friends of the WASPI women. Only the SNP have been consistent in its support for the WASPI women, and this is something I will continue to speak up about. And for years, Presiding Officer, these women have remained resolute in their beliefs and have never given up, and I know that they won't now. But time is unfortunately not on their side, and they're understandably tired. Tired of false promises, tired of U-turns, tired of being ignored, and tired of being treated with contempt, and tired of being told they are wrong. But they're not wrong. They deserve fair and fast compensation now, and that is a fact. No more delays, no more lies. So I'm standing here today with my SNP colleagues to urge the Labour UK Government to rethink this awful decision. Presiding Officer, Labour must reverse this shameful decision now, and it's time for the WASPI women to be treated with the respect they deserve, and it's a moral duty to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Fulton McGregor, up to 4 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to Bill Kidd for his motion and for giving me the opportunity to contribute this evening. I do so in anger, in solidarity and in absolute determination to see justice done for WASPI women. For years, my party, the Scottish Greens, and I have stood in this chamber and outside it with women campaigning against state pension inequality. I have stood with them at rallies, at the cross-party group meetings and at packed public meetings across the North East. I have met campaigners from Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, from Dundee and Angus, women who did everything that was asked of them, who worked, who cared, who paid in, and who were then blindsided by a state that simply failed to tell them the rules had changed. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman found maladministration. The Department for Work and Pensions failed to properly communicate the increase in state pension age. That finding was never contested. The Ombudsman recommended compensation of between £1,000 and £2,950 for each of the 3.6 million women affected. Yet, despite being forced to reconsider its original refusal, the UK Labour government has chosen to double down. It has chosen to ignore the Ombudsman, to ignore 336,000 women here in Scotland, and to show what WASPI women campaigners have rightly described themselves as utter contempt. Let us be clear about the scale of this injustice. In Scotland alone, almost 336,000 women were affected. Many received as little as 1 year's notice of up to a 6-year increase in their state pension age. Compare that to men who had 6 years' notice of a 1-year rise. That is not equality, that is not fairness, that is a failure of government. And of course, around 3.6 million women across the UK were affected. The WASPI campaign estimates that at least 400,000 have died during the course of this long campaign. They died waiting and being denied justice. This injustice did not happen in isolation. By their late 50s, women's pension wealth is equivalent to just 62% that of men's. There is a 39% gender pension gap. 23% of single women pensioners in Scotland live in relative poverty. 2/3 of pension credit claimants are women. Women are more likely to have had interrupted careers because they were caring for children, for parents, for disabled partners. In Scotland, 19% of women aged 45 to 75 and over provide regular, unpaid care. Many of these women were already financially vulnerable before the state pension age changed. The failure to notify them properly compounded that vulnerability and pushed many into real hardship. In the North East, I've spoken to women like Linda Carmichael who had to take on insecure work in their 60s, who burned through modest savings, who relied on food banks, who postponed retirement plans, who felt humiliated and betrayed. These are not abstract statistics. These are our constituents. These are women who built our communities. The UK Labour government says public finances are under pressure. But it is wholly unfair to argue there is no case for compensation when the independent Ombudsman has found maladministration. Compensation will not be a windfall or a bonus. It is redress for a wrong. Labour promised change. On WASPI, it has delivered continuity with the worst instincts of its predecessors. It has chosen to balance the books on the backs of women born in the 1950s. That decision is shameful. It is immoral and it is inhumane. Justice delayed has already been justice denied for too many. The UK government must reverse this decision, implement the Ombudsman's recommendations and provide fair compensation. WASPI women have shown real resilience and dignity. They should not have to show endless patience as well. I stand with them and I will not stop demanding justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Fulton McGregor to be followed by Beatrice Wisher. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and my thanks to Bill Kidd for bringing this members' debate to the Chamber. And I'm also grateful for the opportunity to speak in support of his motion, which calls on the UK Government to reconsider its latest decision on compensation for women affected by state pension age changes. This is an issue of fairness, responsibility and respect for millions of women whose working lives were shaped by expectations created by the government policy. More than 3.5 million women born in the 1950s experienced significant changes to their retirement plans following increases to the state pension age. These changes were not in themselves the core problem. Rather, it was a failure of the Department for Work and Pensions to communicate those changes properly, in good time and in a clear and accessible way. And this failure was, of course, confirmed by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman after a lengthy and detailed investigation. As we've heard, the Ombudsman found that maladministration had occurred and that this had resulted in real injustice. Many women received notification of the changes far too late to adjust their plans. As a result, they faced years of financial uncertainty, difficulties in securing employment, increased caring responsibilities and significant emotional strain. The Ombudsman concluded that compensation of between £1,000 and £2,950 per person was appropriate to reflect the scale and seriousness of the impact. And I do not think that in any way debates like this are playing political football, because the Labour Party, who are now the government of the UK, stood with WASPI women pre-election and said that they would make change, and they reneged on that promise the minute they came into office. That has to be called out. It is a matter of trust, and every Labour Party member here in this chamber and across Scotland should call it out. And I know that some do. My colleague Richard Leonard, for example, has been consistent in calling out that decision. And I know people like Richard Leonard will be missed by the Labour Party in here when he stands down. For many women, the consequences of these failures have been life-altering. Some postponed retirement and remained in physically demanding work for longer than expected. Others struggled to re-enter the labour market after years spent caring for family members. Many faced declining health, reduced savings and increased reliance on benefits. These were not outcomes they could reasonably have anticipated or planned for, given the lack of timely information. The WASPI campaign has consistently and constructively raised these concerns, ensuring that the voices of affected women are heard. Their advocacy has been grounded in evidence, persistence and dignity. The strength of feeling expressed by campaigners reflects not only frustration at the lack of resolution, but also a desire for recognition of the difficulties they endured. This matter is about accountability. When public bodies make mistakes, it's essential that those mistakes are acknowledged and addressed. The Ombudsman exists to provide independent scrutiny, and its conclusions deserve to be treated with respect. Accepting responsibility, learning lessons and offering redress when harm occurs strengthens the public trust in government and public institutions. Scotland has consistently sought to uphold the principles of fairness and social injustice. Many of the women affected, they live in our communities, contribute to our economy and support their families. They're our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our grands, our aunts, our friends and our colleagues. And they deserve to know that their concerns are being raised clearly and firmly in this Parliament. Our support sends an important message that their experiences matter and their voices are respected. So that's why I wanted to speak today, Presiding Officer. I want the women affected in Coatbridge and Christen to know that I will raise their voice and stand up for them on this issue. Presiding Officer, this motion provides us with an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment as a Parliament to fairness, accountability and compassion. By calling on the UK Government to reverse its decision, we stand alongside those seeking recognition of the hardship they endured and acknowledge the findings of an independent authority established to safeguard citizens and their rights. Let's demonstrate that the Scottish Parliament will continue to advocate for fairness and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McGregor. And I call Beatrice Wishart to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Bill Kidd for bringing this important debate to the Chamber this afternoon. I also thank WASPI and Age Scotland for their briefings. Over the years, I've been privileged to meet so many determined 1950s women from across Scotland who have campaigned for the pension they deserve and which is cruelly out of reach because of maladministration and lack of notice about age changes to the state pension. Many of these inspiring women I've met through the WASPI cross-party group or at home in Shetland, and I continue to stand with you all. Many thousands of the 336,000 women affected by the change across Scotland have been left in financial hardship. I want to be clear, as others have said this evening, that this is about an injustice to real people. And it's shameful that we're in the position that we are having this debate after successive governments have failed to act. Before the 2024 general election, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman investigation found that there was maladministration in informing the women affected of the first changes in 1995. There was also a recommendation of compensation of between £1,000 and £2,950 each for those affected. The Conservative Party left our economy in a shambles and waited out making a decision until after the 24 election, cynically leaving it to the incoming Labour government to handle. And as has been the overarching theme of the UK Labour government, it has U-turned on its pre-election position to remedy the situation. The entire process has been shambolic, with a flagrant disregard of the independent PHSO's findings and recommendation. Picking and choosing the findings and recommendations from an organisation whose remit is to investigate complaints about UK government departments and other public bodies is unacceptable. Asking wrong pensioners to pay the price of government mismanagement is simply disgraceful. In this cost of living crisis, 2/3 of pension credit claimants are women, and around 23% of single female Scottish pensioners live in relative poverty. We know public finances are under acute pressure, but it is not fair for the UK government to suggest there is no case for compensation. According to the WASPI campaign briefing, the PHSO said that financial circumstances are not an excuse for not paying compensation. Compensation payments could be phased over a number of years of the life of a parliament. Nor is alleged financial mismanagement by previous administrations an excuse. The Treasury has saved £181 billion by increasing women's state pension age. Had women had the facts presented to them at the time, they would have made different choices and decisions. Living busy lives with families, friends and careers, more should have been done to provide the facts to the cohort of affected women. Now those same women are being, for lack of a better word, punished for making decisions that had made sense for them at the time with the information that they had. And let's ask the question, how many women gave up their jobs to look after parents? How much money did that save the state in social care costs? There's a distinct lack of fairness involved in all of this. The goalposts were moved without women being informed, and we can debate whether that would ever have happened if we were talking about another group in society, but a combination of misogyny and ageism has resulted in 1950s women being overlooked by the grey suits in Whitehall. It's little wonder that older women often say they feel invisible in our society. The irony is not lost that the WASPI cohort are from the generation that campaigned for women's rights. We shouldn't forget that the rights of women that women have today are in no small way due to the women who were born in the 1950s. Maternity pay and maternity leave were not available to women who had their children in the 60s and early 70s. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, the UK Government of today should enact the recommendations from the Ombudsman's findings now, not for party politics, but because it is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Ms Bishop. We now come to the final speaker in the open debate, Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank my colleague for bringing this debate. And there will be obviously repetition in my contribution at this late stage. As we've said, it's estimated 331,000 to 336,000 women in Scotland have been affected by Women Against State Pension Inequality, WASPI. And that's according to data from the House of Commons Library. These women born in the 1950s, and that's 3 of my sisters, I'm old enough to not be caught up, my 3 of my sisters were, they saw their state pension age raised without adequate notification. Compounding the injustice to them, more than 4,000 WASPI women in Scotland have died since 2020 without receiving anything. Now, although UK Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall apologised for a 28-month delay, that's over a 2-year delay, in sending letters warning of the pension change, she said there was no evidence of, quotes, direct financial loss, close quotes. Well, it depends how you define direct. Women had planned their finances on the basis that they would receive their state pension at 60, as I did, paying off my mortgage, especially those who are divorced, widowed or single with only their own income, finding out of the blue they'd better change their plans. It is not that they objected to equalising pension ages with men, but it was the way it was done, lacking notice, and not incrementally. It was simply a cliff edge. DPO, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, in its final report in March 24, concluded that DWP committed maladministration by failing to adequately communicate changes to women's state pension age, found this caused injustice, including distress and lost opportunities to plan, as I mentioned, recommending compensation between £1,000 and £2,950 for those affected. Not a lot of money if your pension of several years has simply disappeared. Not compensation for pension loss, but only for the delay. Now Labour won't even pay that small amount. Give Anas Sarwar his due. Along with Labour colleagues, he had, once upon a time, said that the UK should pay up. But as we know, what Labour says in here, what Anas Sarwar says, is dismissed by the UK leader. It reminds me of the words of Joanne Lamont, who resigned as Labour leader in 2014 with immediate effect, accusing the UK party of treating Scotland like a branch office, and that she had, and I quote, had enough. Anas Sarwar has obviously not had enough. He and Jackie Baillie have been publicly humiliated, but apparently not enough to follow Joanne Lamont's. Put back in their box by Labour HQ, lid firmly nailed down, they have betrayed the WASPI women. Those images of them and Sir Keir Starmer standing shoulder to shoulder with WASPI women cannot be erased. The whole abandonment of the WASPI women by Labour and before that the Tories, after years of false promises, is a disgrace. And I say to the WASPI women, don't give up. Fight for another U-turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call on Shirley Ann Somerville to respond to the debate. Cabinet Secretary, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by also thanking Bill Kidd for bringing this debate to the Chamber, because it is important that this Chamber does once again have yet another debate on the betrayal of the WASPI women. Presiding Officer, I have now been in this Parliament for some time now, and I have witnessed many poor decisions made by successive UK governments. But I have rarely seen such an unforgivable and an ongoing dereliction of a government's basic obligation to its citizens than I have when we look at the betrayal of the WASPI women. Despite the very clear views previously expressed, pretty much across this chamber, here we are again, having to, yet again, call on the UK government to account for an issue it refuses to address. We need to reflect on the sheer magnitude of the injustice that has been meted out on the WASPI women. Over 300,000 of them in Scotland. These women who find themselves shortchanged and let down in the most unforgivable way. No wonder, as Bill Kidd says, that frustration is turning to anger. And as Beatrice Wishart mentioned in her remarks, I do have to wonder, hypothetically, that if it wasn't 3.6 million WASPI women across the UK that was impacted by these decisions, if this had happened to men and not women, might there have been more scrutiny on this issue in the House of Commons, or indeed more commentary in a male-dominated UK media? It's a hypothetical situation, but I think an important one as we still debate and discuss women's place in our society. Presiding Officer, recently the First Minister and I took time to sit down with WASPI women who attended this Parliament, and I must say their testimony was frankly harrowing to hear. Many hard-working women, as colleagues have mentioned tonight, suffering utterly devastating emotional and financial distress at a time in their lives when they expected to be enjoying their well-deserved retirement. Now, I'm presuming from his speech that Tim Eagle didn't make it along to that. It's unfortunate. I think he might have learned something from it, because he would have learned at the very basic that this is not a debate about the equalisation of the pension age. That is a different debate. That is not the injustice that the WASPI Women campaign is fighting for. And if he's looking for facts on the WASPI campaign, can I very gently say to him that he shouldn't rely on a Tory ex-DWP minister to suggest about where the solutions might lie, because I'm afraid he does demonstrate his lack of knowledge on reserved and devolved powers, as well as his understanding of the WASPI cause. And I'm genuinely disappointed that Mercedes Villalba went down the same track on a lack of understanding about devolved issues. But I do give her respect for being the one and only Labour contributor to this debate. So I do respect her position on that. It is a principled one. Certainly.
Briefly, Maggie Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking my intervention. Does she agree that it's really deeply problematic for some of our unionist colleagues to suggest that the Scottish Government should just pick up the bill for this, given that we've done so elsewhere? Where we've done so for other things, it's been a policy choice. This is about maladministration. It's a very different situation, and the UK Government should pay up.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do think there's an irony that the Scottish Government is often criticised for how much it spends on social security, Presiding Officer, but we seem to have a suggestion that, from other colleagues that we should spend more on social security on this issue. So I think there's a lack of a joined-up argument on this, but it is also important to recognise it's very different when we're talking about WASPI women of pensionable age, and we really do need to understand, therefore, the devolution settlement, as well as the point on the UK Government should actually fix its own mistakes. But I do have to say, as I look around, my SNP colleagues, as always, behind me supporting the WASPI women, we had one Labour contributor to this. There are no Labour Party spokespeople taking part in this debate, and I have no idea what the position of the Scottish Labour leader is on WASPI women. But I'll tell the Presiding Officer it's very important that we need to recognise that the Scottish Labour leader does not stand for WASPI women, and he does not stand for Scotland, and his lack of comment on the WASPI cause will be there for WASPI women to judge in the May elections. Presiding Officer, as we look forward to what can be done to help WASPI women, I think it is important that we do reflect on the fact that this WASPI campaign is based on the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report. And when the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions announced that they would once again look at this report, there was a small glimmer of hope. That hope faded once again, Presiding Officer. And it's a genuine insult to the WASPI women who have bravely campaigned for justice for so long. No doubt many Labour MPs and MSPs and candidates have had their pictures taken with WASPI women for many a year, and they see now what happens when Labour get into power, and they will judge them accordingly. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has consistently supported the WASPI campaign, and we will continue to call for the UK Government to provide appropriate compensation to affected women. Because, as Bill Kidd has said, and indeed Jamie Hepburn, women already face an unfair, unequal and uphill battle, whether it's with the gender pay gap or the inequality in pension savings, which other colleagues have already mentioned. The last thing any woman needs is a UK Government that adds to the challenges that they face. So I've written once again to the Minister for Pensions to express my deep disappointment at last month's decision. And I urged him once again to reconsider their position, and I outlined the Scottish Government's continued support for WASPI women. That will continue, because the urgency in this is plain to see. Well, it's certainly plain to see from my perspective. The shameful truth, as colleagues have mentioned, is that too many women have already died waiting for these wrongs to be put right. That is an unacceptable position, and yet it goes on. It's gone on for far too long, and the motion today sets out clearly that the time for change is now, that WASPI women must be compensated, justice must be done, and the WASPI women deserve nothing less.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.